Today's deep dive plunges into the life and legacy of Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. We will be exploring scholarly articles and historical texts to understand how Cyrus rose to power, his unique approach to empire building, and his lasting impact on the ancient world. Prepare to uncover architectural innovations, echoes of Cyrus in the Bible, and a touch of mystery surrounding his tomb. Cyrus the Great, in just 20 years, created the first great world empire, uniting lands from the Iranian plateau to the Mediterranean. This unity would last for nearly 2 centuries, a testament to Cyrus's military and diplomatic prowess. Sources like the Old Testament and Cyropaedia, written by those he conquered Jews, Babylonians, and Greeks, paint a picture of a remarkable ruler. He fostered an empire of diverse people who lived in relative peace and harmony. He achieved this by respecting religious and cultural freedoms and allowing local traditions to thrive as long as the people met the requirements of his imperial system. Consequently, the provinces and their inhabitants prospered under the economic stability of the Achaemenid Empire. By the time of Cyrus's death in 530 BCE, only Egypt remained outside the Persian Empire. His son and successor, Cambyses II, swiftly conquered the Nile Valley between 530 and 522 BCE. While still in its formative phase, the Achaemenid Empire became the most expansive empire ever established between the Aegean Sea and Central Asia. For a long time, ancient Greek authors were the primary source of information about Seleucid history. Cyrus commanded immense respect and prestige in Greece, serving as a model of the good king, particularly in Xenophon's Cyropaedia. Herodotus provides the first and only complete account of Cyrus's life and conquests. To explain the hostilities between the Greeks and Persians, he dedicated extensive chapters to Cyrus's battles, starting with the conquest of Lydia and the capture of Sardis. Before detailing Cyrus's earlier expeditions against Babylon and the Massachai people of Central Asia, Herodotus delves into Cyrus's origins and the Persian kingdom. He describes Persian customs, religious practices, and social institutions. Essentially, Herodotus attempts to understand Cyrus's rise to power, his defeat of Croesus, and the Persians' dominance in Asia. Today, more direct and informative sources shed light on Cyrus's reign. The Babylonian cylinder, known as the Cyrus cylinder, reveals the king assuming a Babylonian title, Cyrus, king of the universe, mighty king, king of Babylon. He also introduces himself as the son of Cambyses, the great king, king of Anshan, grandson of Cyrus, and descendant of Thisbe, another great king of Anshan. Anshan, located in today's province of Fars at the site of Ptolemaion, is near Parsa, Persepolis, later founded by Darius I. This document establishes Cyrus as a descendant of a royal lineage founded by Thisbe. A cylinder seal, imprinted on Persepolis tablets dating back to Darius III's reign, further supports this lineage. It reads, Kuros of Anshan, son of Thisbe. While we cannot definitively identify this Kuros, he likely belonged to the same family from Anshan. The scene on the seal is significant. It depicts a warrior on horseback wielding his spear, having vanquished 2 enemies. A third enemy stands before him, pierced to death. The seal style points to an artistic workshop in the court of Anshan during the first half of the 7th century BCE. This region, where Iranian immigrants interacted with the local Elamite population for centuries, saw the emergence of the Persian people, displaying both Iranian and Elamite cultural characteristics. Darius I later glorified the Thisbes of Anshan to enhance his prestige in antiquity, claiming Cyrus as one of his ancestors. However, there is no concrete evidence of this familial connection. It is possible that the male lineage of the Thisbes ended with Cyrus II's death in 530 BCE and the subsequent deaths of his sons, Cambyses II and Bardia, in 522 BCE. Upon his death, Cyrus was laid to rest in a magnificent tomb constructed at Pasargadae in the heart of Fars. Apart from accounts by Greek historians, particularly Herodotus, detailing Cyrus's victories against the Median and Lydian armies, only the capture of Babylon is well documented thanks to cuneiform records. The Cyrus cylinder highlights Cyrus's efforts to collaborate with the Babylonian political and religious elite. He presents himself as the liberator who ended Nabonidus' exploitation of Babylonian sanctuaries. He restored these temples to their full economic and financial capacity. It was during this time that Cyrus allowed the Judean community, exiled in Babylon since Nebuchadnezzar's reign, to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. While the cylinder itself doesn't mention this event, the information comes from Judean sources, specifically the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. The book of Ezra cites Cyrus's decrees stating, in the first year of King Cyrus, Cyrus issued a decree concerning the house of God in Jerusalem. He decreed that the house should be rebuilt. The place where sacrifices are offered and burnt offerings are brought should be restored. The cost will be paid from the house of the king. While the authenticity of this decree is debated, the act itself is undeniable. However, Judea was not reinstated as a kingdom, but likely became a province governed by a centrally appointed administrator. A few years later, in 533 BCE, Judea and its surrounding territories were incorporated into a larger provincial government encompassing Babylonia and the lands beyond the Euphrates. This example illustrates that Cyrus was more than just a conqueror. He possessed a vision for organization.
Satrapies, or provinces ruled by governors representing the king, existed before Darius I. Satraps maintained order, collected taxes, and managed human resources. Examples include Sardis and Daskylion in Asia Minor, Arachosia and Bactria in the Iranian Plateau and Central Asia. The case of Gubaru in Babylonia demonstrates the extent of the imperial administration under Cyrus. Among these administrators, treasurers played a critical role, as regional governors had to send annual taxes to the central government. In Babylonia, the administration interacted with influential sanctuaries, like the Temple of Iana at Uruk. These sanctuaries, with their large staff and extensive land holdings, contributed significantly to the central administration, providing labor for royal construction projects and goods for the king and his court. The satrap also had the authority to apprehend and prosecute criminals, even those from the elite. For instance, Gimelu, an oblate responsible for the livestock revenues of the Iana, was convicted of theft and sentenced after a trial lasting several years. Cyrus also introduced a hatchery system in Babylonia. This system allotted cultivated land to communities in exchange for military service. These communities had various designations, such as the Bow Estate or Chariot Estate. While this system is better documented in the second half of the 5th century BCE, it likely developed under Cyrus, building upon existing Neo-Babylonian structures. Cyrus's prestige remained intact among the Persians throughout the Achaemenid period. While Darius I omits him from his ancestral lineage in the Basutan inscription, this does not necessarily indicate an attempt to erase Cyrus's legacy. It is possible that Darius I commissioned the inscriptions at Pasargadae, where Cyrus identifies himself as an Achaemenid, to link the dynasty's origins to Cyrus. Darius I also married Cyrus's 2 daughters, Atossa and Artistone, and one of Bardia's daughters, Parmes. These princesses are mentioned in Persepolis tablets from Darius Cyrus' reign. The fact that Darius II named one of his sons Cyrus further attests to the enduring respect for Cyrus the Great, a sentiment echoed in Greek texts. Alexander the Great resurrected Cyrus's image. Accounts from Alexander's companions portray him as a friend of Cyrus. His entry into Babylon in 331 BCE mirrors that of Cyrus 2 centuries earlier in 539 BCE. Alexander visited Pasargadae twice, once between January and May 330 BCE, after capturing and burning the palaces at Persepolis, and again in 325 BCE upon returning from India. Pasargadae, founded by Cyrus in the heart of Persephars, boasted a formidable citadel, palaces adorned with gardens irrigated by canals, and most notably Cyrus's tomb, which captivated Alexander. Several Greek eyewitness descriptions of the tomb exist, differing in details. Aristobulus mentions its location in a royal garden filled with sacred trees. Despite these discrepancies, these testimonies helped James Morier identify the tomb in 1811 after its initial visit and illustration by Johann Albrecht von Mandelslos in 1639. Archaeological excavations later revealed traces of the gardens and irrigation canals. Upon returning from India in 325 BCE, Alexander learned that Cyrus's tomb had been looted. The robbers took everything except the sarcophagus and divan, even desecrating Cyrus's body. They tried to make the sarcophagus portable but failed, leaving it behind. Alexander arrested the Magi guarding the tomb, but released them when they refused to confess under torture. Urine provides additional information about the Magi's duties. A small building near the tomb housed them. They received daily provisions from the king, a sheep, meal, wine, and a horse each month to sacrifice to Cyrus. The Persepolis tablets, dating from 492 to 458 BCE, offer further context. They document the royal administration supplying agricultural products and animals for sacrifices, including those performed near the tombs of prominent royal figures. Alexander's companions' accounts also attest to the existence of a cult dedicated to Cyrus that persisted for 2 centuries after his death. Alexander tasked Aristobulus with restoring the tomb. He was to repair the sarcophagus, replace the body, adorn the divan, and restore all ornaments. The door was to be sealed with stone and clay, imprinted with the royal seal. Far from being a destroyer of Persian traditions, Alexander demonstrated respect for Cyrus's memory. He recognized Cyrus as the founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, the very empire Alexander had conquered. Even today, Cyrus's tomb at Pasargadae serves as a poignant place of Achaemenid memory, more evocative than the rock-cut tombs of his successors at Naki Rustum and Persepolis.
One of the most fascinating aspects of Cyrus the Great is his incorporation of diverse religious traditions into his own belief system. There's a debate surrounding his ethnicity, fueled by the ambiguity of his name. Scholars offer various interpretations, some suggesting Iranian roots, others pointing to Elamite origins. Born in Anshan, one of the key cities of the Elamite kingdom during a time of Persian ascendancy, Cyrus likely grew up in a multicultural environment. Considering the proximity of Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf, it's reasonable to assume that he was exposed to a variety of religious traditions from a young age, which undoubtedly influenced his interactions with different faith communities. Both Babylonian and Jewish texts portray Cyrus as a benevolent ruler, particularly receptive to the religions of his subjects. This starkly contrasts with the policies of previous Mesopotamian rulers. In these accounts, Cyrus emerges as a restorer of order, in a world where the rightful gods and people are discontented and unrighteous individuals hold power. Cyrus is depicted as chosen by the gods and reciprocating their love for the cities and people under his rule. A short inscription on a brick from Uruk reads,
Cyrus loves Esangil and Azida. Another inscription from Ur states that Cyrus returned the gods to their shrines. The themes of love, restoration, and divine selection consistently appear in texts produced during this period, especially in Mesopotamia. Another recurring theme associated with Cyrus in Babylonian and biblical traditions is his peaceful nature and his establishment of peace throughout his realm. While this could be attributed to later propaganda disseminated by scribes under Persian rule, it's significant that no alternative narratives exist. We have to acknowledge the possibility that these accounts contain elements of truth. An Akkadian text from either Babylon or Sippar criticizes Nabonidus, the preceding ruler of Babylon, for neglecting proper religious ceremonies and practices. It then states that Cyrus declared peace for them, ensured proper sacrifices for gods, and even increased their offerings. In this narrative, Cyrus becomes the chosen instrument of the gods, neglected by the discredited Nabonidus. Similarly, the Jewish God views Cyrus as his supporter, as proclaimed in Isaiah 45.1. Behold my servant whom I uphold, and my chosen one in whom I delight. In the Old Testament, Cyrus attains an unparalleled status, with Yahweh declaring, who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple, let its foundations be laid. This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of. In Ezra, we encounter the same theme of restoring the temple of God, mirroring the sentiments expressed in Mesopotamian documents. Cyrus's decree, as recorded in Ezra 1.2-3, states, let the temple be rebuilt as a place to present sacrifices, and let its foundations be laid. Once again, the restoration of sacrifices is emphasized. Ezra also highlights a significant shift. While Nebuchadnezzar plundered the temple, Cyrus becomes the restorer, returning things to their places, as stated in Ezra 1.7. This concept transcends mere propaganda. It reflects the deeply rooted Iranian idea. The recurring theme of putting back into order what has become undone resonates with the concept of Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, represents order in the cosmos, while Agamemnon embodies disorder and lie. When we interpret these texts within the Iranian ideological framework, we see a clear Iranian Mazdian perspective. The king, as an agent of Ahura Mazda, restores order on earth. Consequently, unruly kings of the past, such as Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus, become agents of disorderly, representing the evil spirit or Agamemnon. Cyrus's narrative cleverly positions Nabonidus, who seized power in Babylon through a coup, as a figure of disorder, with Cyrus acting as the restorer of balance. These actions of Cyrus strikingly resemble those depicted in Darius I's Behistun inscription. In this inscription, Darius endeavors to explain the chaos that ensued after Kemeti's death and the rise of the impostor Gomada. By defeating and deposing Gomada, Darius effectively destroyed Agamemnon's agent and restored order to the empire. The Cyrus cylinder serves as a prime example of portraying a conquering king as the restorer of order and the harbinger of peace in a world consumed by chaos. According to the cylinder, the period preceding Cyrus was marked by the abandonment of the New Year festival and its associated rituals. This neglect caused widespread discontent among both humans and gods. Marduk, the most prominent Mesopotamian god, much like Yahweh, selected Cyrus to rectify this situation. The parallels between Isaiah and the Cyrus cylinder are remarkable. In the cylinder it states, he, Marduk, took him by the hand. Cyrus, king of Anshan, which echoes Isaiah 44.28-45.1. Cyrus, whom he, Yahweh, has taken by the hand. Whether it's Yahweh, Marduk, or other deities, both Jewish and Mesopotamian traditions consistently portray Cyrus's actions as divinely ordained. The practical implication of this restoration was to appease local priesthoods and elites.
By collaborating with them, Cyrus cleverly integrated them into his burgeoning imperial structure. Cyrus the Great successfully positioned himself as a figure aligned with these various traditions. Given Cyrus's depiction as the chosen one by both Mesopotamian and Jewish deities, his personal religious beliefs become a subject of intense scrutiny. Arguments support both Iranian Mazdean and non-Iranian beliefs and practices. The challenge lies in the fact that most accounts and reports about him were written long after his death, and the state of Mazdaism and its connection to early Achaemenid rulers remains unclear. Xenophon, writing nearly a century later, notes that Cyrus was educated in the Persian manner and followed the instructions of the Magi. This suggests that his education was intertwined with the Mazdean tradition, as the Magi, a Median tribe, constituted the priestly class. The Magi were responsible for memorizing and reciting sacred hymns, performing appropriate sacrifices, and tending to sacred fires. It's worth noting that Cyrus's most renowned daughter was named Atossa, a name associated with the Mazdean tradition. In Mazdean hagiography, Kavi Vishtaspa is credited with embracing and propagating the religious ideas of Zarathustra. His wife's name is mentioned as Hutalsa, implying that Cyrus might have been familiar with this ancient tradition. More compelling evidence emerges from Pasargadae, the site of his palace and royal tomb. Circumstantial evidence hints at not only Iranian practices, but also a potential Mazdean influence. The presence of stone fire holders suggests a connection to the Mazdean fire cult. Cyrus's tomb itself offers intriguing insights. While its design draws inspiration from Western Asia, the king's body was kept from touching the sacred earth, aligning with Mazdean tradition. Furthermore, a now-lost carved image of a flower, similar to the lotus upon which Mithra stands in the Sasanian-era Takebustan, once adorned the tomb's entrance. This leads to speculation that Cyrus held a connection to Mithra, a significant pre-Zoroastrian deity later integrated into the Mazdean pantheon. The lotus isn't the only clue hinting at Cyrus the Great's reverence for Mithra. Accounts indicate that after his death, the Magi conducted regular sacrificial services at his tomb. These sacrifices included a daily sheep, a fixed amount of meal and wine, and a monthly horse, offerings that mirror those of the Sasanian period in the 3rd century CE. An inscription at Kabiye Zardasht reveals that Shapur offered similar sacrifices for the souls of his royal family. Whether Mazdean in origin or not, this practice persisted into the Sasanian period, indicating its long-standing presence among the Persians and Fars. A passage from Ctesias mentions the sacrifice of a horse, a practice rooted in the Indo-Iranian tradition of Avameda. Cyrus's son Cambyses' order to sacrifice a horse for his father clearly aligns with this tradition. Xenophon's Cyropaedia includes references to royal parades organized by Cyrus, featuring a white horse and fire. The horse sacrifice is described as follows. After the oxen came horses, an offering to the sun, then a white chariot with a golden yoke, hung with garlands and dedicated to Zeus, and after that the white chariot of the sun, wreathed like the one before it, and then a third chariot, the horses of which were caparisoned with scarlet trappings, and behind walked men carrying fire upon a mighty hearth. This account depicts a ritual procession in which a chariot is dedicated to the sun, clearly representing Mithra, a revered deity among Indo-Iranians. While Mithra doesn't appear in early Achaemenid inscriptions, he emerges during Artaxerxes II's reign at the end of the 5th century BCE. Classical authors mention the Persians' demand for a vast number of horses from their subjects, specifically 20,000 horses for the Feast of Mithra. They also describe sacred white horses present during Cyrus's conquest of Babylon. Mithra, a deity significant in both Indian and Iranian cultures before the development of Mazdaism, was primarily associated with contracts, oaths, the sun, and martial qualities. These attributes, especially the connection to the sun, align with classical accounts of Cyrus. The Avestan hymn, dedicated to Mithra, exhibits similarities with the ritual parade described in Cyropaedia. Cyrus the Great introduced an unprecedented level of religious tolerance to the region. While the precise reasons for his acceptance of Jewish and Babylonian religious practices remain open to interpretation, his actions are undeniable. Consequently, he earned lasting admiration and respect not only in Mesopotamian tradition, but also within the Jewish faith. Conversely, our understanding of his personal religious beliefs remains limited. Circumstantial evidence points towards Iranian practices, and his name offers subtle clues about his environment. However, his actions speak volumes about his approach to ruling both the ancient Near East and the vast Persian Empire of the Achaemenids. Neither the Macedonian conquest nor the Arab invasion of Persia completely eradicated the influence of Achaemenid capital cities like Pasargadae and Persepolis. These monuments continue to function as symbols of identity, representing historical legacies and significant milestones in human civilization. After the Persian Empire's fall in 330 BCE, the monuments of Pasargadae, Cyrus the Great's capital, escaped the devastation inflicted upon Persepolis. This was partly due to the profound respect for Cyrus's personality and the site's geographical location. Classical accounts tell us that Alexander paid tribute to Cyrus by visiting his tomb at Pasargadae. The purported Greek inscription on Cyrus's tomb, mentioned in accounts of Alexander's life, is a captivating illustration of the Greek world's admiration for Cyrus and their interpretation of foreign cultures. However, Alexander's visit was likely driven by more than mere respect. He faced a persistent challenge in legitimizing his rule due to his lack of blood ties to the Achaemenid dynasty. His visit to Pasargadae can be seen as a strategic move to gain support from the Persian population. Historical accounts also suggest that Alexander sought to seize the royal treasures housed at the old capital. The Greco-Macedonian conquerors left little behind at the site apart from their 3rd century BCE occupation of the vast citadel, the ruins of which are found at Tali-Takt, near the royal city. The history of the site during the 1,000 years between the Achaemenid Empire's demise and the Muslim conquest of Fars in the 7th century remains largely shrouded in mystery. The Sasanian kings, native to Fars and possibly descendants of the Achaemenid line, favored Istakhr as their royal residence and regional center. They remained captivated by the ruins of Persepolis, located a mere 5 kilometers away and nestled against the mountains. However, they seem to display little interest in Pasargadae, as evidenced by the few insignificant rock-cut remnants from that period found in the site's northeastern outskirts. One late Sasanian visitor to Pasargadae left behind an enigmatic carving on a stone, depicting a plan of the ruined citadel of Tali-Takt. Over time, the true identities of the builders of these magnificent Achaemenid monuments faded from memory. The awe-inspiring ruins of the Achaemenid period transformed into places of fascination, invoking a glorious past filled with spiritual and mythological associations rather than factual historical recollections. 2 mythical figures became associated with these structures. The first was Jamshid, the legendary hero king of ancient Iran, prominently featured in Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, Book of Kings. The second was Solomon, renowned in the Quran for his extraordinary power and wisdom. In the 12th century, Ibn Balkhi, the author of the acclaimed Farsnameh, briefly mentions the monumental tomb as being located in a meadow near the tomb of Solomon's mother. He describes it as a square-built house of stone which no one dare look inside for fear lest he should become blind. Hamdullah Mustafi, in his Nushat al-Qulub, echoes this description. Mustafi, known for his rationality and critical thinking, didn't subscribe to the fantastical notions put forward by Muhammad ibn Muhammad Hamadani in his Ajab bin Meh, Book of Wonders, around 1194 CE. Hamadani believed that the monuments of Pasargadae and Persepolis were the handiwork of monsters due to their incredible engineering feats. This view was shared by the prominent Timurid-era historian Hafiz Abru. In his Tariq-i Hafiz-i Abru Chronicles, he describes the Margzar, or meadow of Kalan, as being near Mashred Madari Suleiman, the tomb of Solomon's mother. He attributed the construction of such exquisitely carved monuments, including those near Istakhr, Persepolis, to genies, monsters serving Solomon. For 120 years, from 1148 to 1287 CE, the Seljuq dynasty of Atabaks ruled Fars. Initially tributaries of the Seljuks and later the Mongols, they protected Fars from the Mongol army's destructive wrath. The province experienced a period of relative prosperity, particularly during Iz al-Din Saad's reign, from whom the celebrated poet Sadi derived his Takhalis, or nom de plume. At Pasargadae, this ruler transformed the compound surrounding Cyrus's tomb into a mosque. His name, alongside the date 1223 CE, is inscribed in various locations. Inside the tomb chamber, the presence of a shallow prayer niche, or mihrab, and an intricately carved compass on one of the base tiers clearly indicate the tomb's function as the central element of the medieval mosque. A hoard of gold coins from the Seljuq dynasty was unearthed northwest of Cyrus's tomb during leveling work in April 1971. In the introduction to his Golistan, Saadi refers to Atabak Abu Bakr, son of Saad, as the heir to the kingdom of Solomon. Inscriptions attributed to this dynasty, engraved on stone blocks taken from the Achaemenid palaces at Pasargadae, frequently mentioned the Seljuq ruler as the heir to the realm of Jam and Solomon, 2 figures often conflated into one. After a period of conflict, Shah Shuja, a ruler known for his cultural refinement and patronage of the arts, came to power in the region, reigning from 1358 to 1384 CE. His rule was celebrated by the renowned Iranian poet Hafiz. Shah Shuja constructed a large building, likely a residence or caravanserai, near Cyrus's tomb at Pasargadae. Excavations in 1949 uncovered coins and inscriptions dating back to his reign. Josephat Barbaro, a Venetian ambassador and merchant, visited the site in 1474 and recorded the monument being referred to as the Tomb of Solomon's Mother. Due to its remote location away from the main route connecting Shiraz to Isfahan, the ruins at Pasargadae attracted few notable European travelers during the 17th century. Pietro della Faye, a Roman traveler, alluded to the presence of a tomb at Pasargadae attributed to Solomon's mother during his journey in 1621. Johann Albrecht von Medelsloh, a German ambassador, visited Persepolis and Pasargadae in 1638. He documented his visit to Cyrus's tomb, describing it as being in a little chapel built of white marble upon a high square of free stonework. His engraving of the tomb, likely based on sketches made on site, provides the only visual representation of the monument before the more accurate illustrations of the 19th century emerged. Regarding the attribution of the tomb to Solomon's mother, the Carmelite father of Shiraz informed the young traveler that the monument was the sepulchre of the mother of Shah Suleiman, the 14th caliph. For the Dutch travelers John Stroys and Cornelis de Bruyn, the tomb was a site of feminine pilgrimage. Interestingly, this tradition seems to persist to this day. The Safavid kingdom's collapse in 1722 brought a temporary halt to European explorations for several decades. Pasargadae's remote location led to its exclusion from the itineraries of prominent 18th century travelers like the German Carsten Niebuhr and the Englishman William Franklin, who focused their visits on the ruins at Persepolis. The emergence of the Qajar dynasty in 1779 restored political stability in Iran. The dynasty's first two rulers, Aqwa Muhammad Khan and Fath Ali Shah, possessed a strong sense of Iranian identity. Fal Ali Shah, who served as the governor of Fars, likely drew inspiration from the magnificent ruins of Persepolis and Nashi Rustam when commissioning his own rock reliefs at Shiraz and Ray. European travels to Persia intensified during the Napoleonic Wars in Europe and the Russo-Persian conflicts between 1804 and 1828. A series of British and French diplomatic missions were dispatched to Persia with the goal of securing alliances in the event of a threat to India. British accounts of the ruins at Persepolis, particularly those written by William Owsley, James Morier, and Robert Kerr Porter, utilized both previous travelogues and their own meticulous observations and research. Owsley heavily relies on historical and geographical texts from Islamic Iran, as well as Greek and Latin sources. His description of the site and its remains is arguably the most comprehensive account of Pasargadae published in the West at that time. He mentions Tali Tak, referred to as the Takht-e Madari Suleiman, throne of Solomon's mother, the Divan Khane, or Ecumenid Audience Hall, with its solitary standing column, and the Zendan, or Prison of Solomon, strikingly similar to the one at Nakhsher Rustam. He observes that the Zendan appears to have been built for the same purpose, although the exact purpose remains unknown, and during the same period as its counterpart at Nakhsher Rustam. Owsley also mentions the medieval caravanserai and the monument known as the Tomb of Solomon's Mother. Equally valuable is the account by James Morier, the secretary of the diplomatic mission. He is the first to suggest that the so-called Tomb of the Mother of Solomon corresponds to the monument described by classical authors, such as Arrian and Strabo, as the tomb of Cyrus the Great. Robert Kerr Porter, an Englishman serving the Russian Empire, becomes the first visitor to Pasargadae to refer to the ruins by their proper name. Both Kerr Porter and the French architect Charles Texier published drawings of the winged figure and the trilingual inscription that once adorned it. These were superseded by the publication of Flandin and Costa's comprehensive work, Voyage en Perse, in 1851. The honor of documenting the ruins using the century's most captivating technological innovation belongs to Colonel Luigi Pisse, an Italian infantry officer from Naples, who captured the first photographs of the ruins at Persepolis and Pasargadae in 1857. These images predate those taken by Stolze in the 1870s and 1880s. Lord Curzon's contribution to the study of Pasargadae marks a significant turning point. He undertakes a comprehensive examination of the ruins, synthesizing all existing knowledge about the site. In his book Persia and the Persian Question, London 1892, Volume 2, he dedicates approximately 20 pages to describing and interpreting the remains of Pasargadae. He meticulously analyzes all relevant textual evidence and combines it with his own astute observations. In his assessment, the structure known as the Tomb of Solomon's Mother presents a further point of absolute correspondence with classical accounts. Curzon's work captures the attention of the German Assyriologist Friedrich Weisbach. In an article, Weisbach raises several questions. Where did Pasargadae lie? Do the ruins of Murghab correspond to that antique place? How did the tomb of Cyrus look? What was the meaning of the tomb of the mother of Solomon? And to which ruler do the inscriptions of Murghab belong? He ultimately concludes that the tomb of Solomon's mother is not the tomb of Cyrus. The Zenden aligns better with the descriptions provided by classical writers. The CMA inscription in cuneiform dates back to the time of Cyrus the Younger, 5th century BCE. And the relief of the winged figure was erected by his mother, Parysatis, in memory of her son. Ernst Herzfeld's excavations of the major Achaemenid ruins of Fars, particularly those at Pasargadae and Persepolis, from 1928 to 1934, usher in an unprecedented era of scientific research, the history of which has received considerable attention in the past 2 decades. The Babylonian scribes who composed the Cyrus cylinder drew upon a millennia-long tradition of royal building inscriptions in Babylonia and Assyria. These inscriptions served as a means for kings to commemorate the construction or reconstruction of temples, palaces, fortifications, canals, and other public works. They also provided an opportunity for rulers to immortalize their names, genealogies, titles, attributes, the divine support for their reigns, and occasionally their deeds. The objects bearing these inscriptions were often embedded within the structures or foundations of the buildings they commemorated. The intention was that future rulers and their scribes would rediscover these inscriptions, acknowledge them, and treat them with reverence. These documents embodied an ancient sense of history by both reflecting and sometimes directly referencing a distant past. They also expressed an expectation of an enduring future. The information that these rulers chose to convey informs, but also shapes later understandings of the Mesopotamian past, including the historical interpretations of modern scholars. The barrel-shaped clay cylinder is reminiscent of the objects that carried numerous Babylonian royal inscriptions from the reigns of Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian kings, beginning in the 8th century BCE. The Cyrus cylinder stands out as one of the last known examples of these inscriptions. Its text is arranged in 45 lines that run continuously across its long axis. In this respect, it differs from the inscribed cylinders of the Neo-Babylonian kings who directly preceded Cyrus, which typically feature texts arranged in 2 parallel columns running around the circumference. Instead, the Cyrus cylinder bears a resemblance to its older counterparts, commemorating Neo-Assyrian kings, a similarity that might be intentional. Discovered in 1879 in the area of Babylon where Esagil, the grand temple of Marduk, once stood, the Cyrus cylinder has recently been partially corroborated by fragments of another copy of its text. These fragments, identified on 2 pieces of a single clay tablet from the British Museum's Babylonian collection, are remnants of an archival copy of the inscription. The forms of the cuneiform signs used to record the text resemble contemporary Neo-Babylonian forms, rather than the ornate, archaizing sign forms preferred in some inscriptions of the Neo-Babylonian kings. The text is written in Standard Babylonian, a variant of the Babylonian dialect of Akkadian. This language served as the language of literature, learning, scholarship, science, and royal inscriptions in both Assyria and Babylonia. Compared to contemporary letters, which represent the language actually used in everyday communication, Standard Babylonian employed elevated vocabulary, archaic grammatical structures, and antiquated expressions. Cyrus's message was intended to sound both grand and ancient. The primary message conveyed by the Cyrus cylinder is the conqueror's self-portrayal as a restorer of order, a well-established royal theme. The compositional elements of this portrayal adhere to a familiar repertoire, including the opening temporal clause that sets the scene and the closing prayer for divine favor. This use of exalted language within conventional forms minimized the novelty for ancient readers or listeners, even in instances where modern observers recognize proclamations of historical significance. As confirmed by the recently discovered tablet fragments, the text of the cylinder opens from the perspective of Marduk, the god of Babylon, and the supreme deity in the Babylonian pantheon. He surveys Babylonia under the rule of its Babylonian king with divine displeasure. While many details are lost due to damage, the passage employs charged language to describe the construction and endowment of a sacrilegious shrine, the neglect of proper support for Marduk's temple and cult, an affront to the reverence owed to the supreme god, ruinous burdens imposed upon the people, and the anger and abandonment of the other gods whose images have been brought to and confined within Babylon. Although the name of the wicked Babylonian king responsible, Nabonidus, who ruled from 555 to 539 BCE, is missing, the passage seemingly implicates his son and regent in these transgressions, foreshadowing Cyrus's later association of his own son, Cambyses, with his righteous restoration of order. As the text continues, still narrated from Marduk's viewpoint, the god's anger subsides. He contemplates the ruined sanctuaries, foreshadowing Cyrus's efforts to restore them, and the near-death state of the people of Sumer and Akkad, a traditional term for Babylonia. His focus broadens as he surveys all lands, searching for a righteous king. He finds Cyrus, king of Anshan, the ancient Elamite capital of the territory now known as Persia.
Marduk takes Cyrus by the hand, designates him as supreme ruler, and subjects Media and the mountainous regions bordering Babylonia to his authority. Once again, the text employs traditional literary terms rather than contemporary political names for these regions. Pleased with Cyrus's accomplishments, Marduk commands him to proceed to Babylon. The narrative perspective shifts from a heavenly overview to earthly involvement. Marduk escorts Cyrus, walking beside him like a friend and companion, as his immense army marches alongside, fully armed. Marduk leads Cyrus into the heart of Babylon, the district called Sharana, home to the royal palace and Marduk's temple. He enters without conflict or battle, and receives the surrender of the impious Babylonian king Nabonidus, whose fate is left unmentioned. The people of Babylon and Babylonia, their leaders and their governors, pay homage to Cyrus, joyfully praising him as their savior. The text continues to use archaic terms with no current political relevance. The narrative point of view has transitioned in stages from Marduk's observation of Babylonia and his broader survey of all lands to Cyrus's rise in western Iran and his advance into Babylonia, and finally to Cyrus enthroned in the heart of Babylon. The perspective then shifts from Marduk's to Cyrus's own. The remainder of the text is presented as Cyrus's personal declaration, beginning with, "I am Cyrus." Cyrus identifies himself in three distinct ways. First, he uses a series of Mesopotamian royal epithets, some favored by Assyrian kings, to assert his universal dominion over both Babylonia and the entire world. Second, in decidedly non-Babylonian genealogical and geographical terms, he presents himself as the descendant of 3 generations of kings of Anshan, establishing him as the perpetual seat of kingship, as Babylonian rulers were required to be. Third, in religious terms, he identifies as the protege of the Babylonian gods Bel, Marduk, and Nabu. The subsequent lines, spoken by Cyrus, echo key elements of the personal narrative in the first part of the text. Cyrus elaborates on his peaceful entry to Babylon and the resulting relief experienced by Babylonia, freed from anxiety, oppression, and exhaustion. He reiterates that he achieved this as Marduk's agent and declares the palace of Babylon as his own royal seat. Just as Marduk took pleasure in Cyrus's ascendancy in Iran, Cyrus states that Marduk is pleased with his righteous deeds in Babylonia. Marduk rewards these deeds with blessings upon Cyrus and his son Cambyses, presented as the virtuous counterpart to the wicked Babylonian prince-regent. Blessings are also bestowed upon his conquering army, and just as the people and leaders of Babylonia kiss Cyrus's feet, he describes enthroned rulers from all corners of the world, from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, and tent-dwelling kings of the West, bringing tribute and kissing his feet in Babylon. The narrative then abruptly shifts to geographical specifics. Cyrus lists towns and territories in Assyria, northern Babylonia, the lands along the Diyala River, and east of the Tigris River as far as Susa in Khuzestan. These areas lie between Babylonia proper to the west and Media and Persia to the east. He claims to have renovated their dilapidated sanctuaries, reinstated their gods, and restored their populations, using imagery of gathering and resettlement that had been customary for expressing the reestablishment of peace and order since the time of Hammurabi of Babylon. He rectifies Nabonidus' impiety, which enraged the gods of Babylonia, by returning them to their shrines. He prays that the restored gods will reciprocate his good deeds by speaking favorably of him before the great gods of Babylon, Bel, Marduk, and his son Nabu. He invokes blessings upon himself and his son, Cambyses. In the concluding lines, which are partially damaged, Cyrus recounts his efforts to fill the duties of a Babylonian ruler as a supporter of the temple cult and a builder. He mentions a modest increase in daily offerings of poultry, presumably to Marduk. He states his intention to fortify Imgur-Enlil, the main defensive wall of Babylon, as if to emphasize that Babylon is not a conquered enemy citadel, but his own political center. He takes credit for completing an unfinished canal embankment using baked bricks and bitumen. He describes adorning a structure, possibly the Temple of Marduk, with cedar doors clad in bronze, along with their thresholds and fittings. And he reveals that during the course of this work, he discovered and restored an inscription of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, mirroring the building inscriptions of his adversary Nabonidus, which mentioned finding documents of ancient Babylonian kings. Cyrus's text ends with a prayer to Marduk for the gifts of a long life, an enduring reign, and an eternal memory. Royal inscriptions of Babylonian and Assyrian kings occasionally reference experts or scholars consulted by rulers regarding building projects, the identification of old inscriptions, and the creation of new ones.
Scribes were tasked with copying old inscriptions as evidenced by the recently discovered tablet fragments, which include a copy of the Cyrus cylinder text made by a scribe named Kishti Marduk. The identity of the original composer remains unknown. The composer's work demonstrates a deep understanding of vocabulary, epithets, formulas, and tropes, suggesting a focus on conveying solemnity rather than originality. Beneath this formal surface, the work also exhibits a concern for meticulous and elegant structure. The beginning of the text introduces a genre-bending innovation. The opening temporal clause, establishing the scene and occasion, is a feature found in earlier inscriptions on stelae, intended for public display, but not in those on cylinders meant to be placed within building foundations. The absence of Cyrus from the opening lines is remarkable in a royal inscription, where the king typically takes center stage. This unconventional approach creates a different kind of emphasis through anticipation. The initial depiction of Nabonidus' wickedness finds its closest parallel in the stele inscription by Nabonidus himself, which describes the devastation inflicted upon Babylon by the Assyrians generations earlier. The cross-references and shifts in voice between the first and second parts of Cyrus's text effectively convey the message that Cyrus's reign is the fulfillment of Marduk's will. The changing perspectives, moving from heaven to earth, from Iran to Babylon and from Babylon outwards, create a sense of performance. Who was this carefully crafted editorial work intended for? Cyrus himself undoubtedly needed to be satisfied, as well as any future ruler who might stumble upon the object, just as Cyrus had found an inscription of Ashurbanipal. The simplistic notion that such documents were solely intended for the king, the gods, and posterity is contradicted by numerous examples of archived or displayed copies of inscriptions from Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian kings. It is further contradicted by inscriptions of Cyrus's Achaemenid successors, and now by the tablet fragments bearing Kishti Marduk's copy of the Cyrus cylinder text. While the composer undoubtedly had an audience in mind, the scope of that audience, the means of presenting the text, and the process of transmitting it to later scholars like Kishti Marduk remain subjects of speculation, uncertainty, and debate. The text portrays Cyrus and his army as peaceful occupiers of Babylon, overlooking their military victory over the Babylonian army in battles a few months prior. Cyrus's declarations establishing his residence in the royal palace of Babylon depict him as both the legitimate king of Babylonia and the recognized ruler of Babylonia's tributary empire beyond the Euphrates. He asserts his control over the Babylonian people and their governors, and receives tribute from rulers of the West. A reader or listener might infer that Babylon remained the capital and center of the empire and was destined to become the heart of Cyrus's expanding realm. Cyrus repeatedly associates himself with his son Cambyses throughout the text. The closest parallels to these passages are found in inscriptions of Cyrus's scorned predecessor, Nabonidus, which occasionally invoke similar blessings upon his son Belshazzar. These invocations are tantamount to designating an heir apparent, highlighting the perennial challenge of dynastic succession in ancient monarchies. Other Babylonian documents offer glimpses into the complexities of this issue. A Babylonian chronicle recounts Cyrus formally installing his son Cambyses during the annual New Year's ritual at the beginning of his reign. Date formulas on legal tablets from the subsequent year, Cyrus's first full regnal year, refer to Cambyses as king of Babylon and Cyrus as king of all the lands, suggesting at least nominally a kingdom of Babylonia existing within the greater Persian Empire. This arrangement proves short-lived. After a year, Cambyses' name disappears from date formulas. Shortly thereafter, legal and administrative texts begin to mention satraps with the title Governor of Babylon and across the river, i.e. the Euphrates. Their province, nominally encompassing the conquered Babylonian Empire, was governed from Babylon, but by Persian governors, not Babylonian kings. 8 years after Cyrus entered Babylon, Cambyses succeeded him seamlessly as the sole ruler of the entire empire and its constituent parts, reigning from 529 to 522 BCE. In the language of Babylonian legal texts, he was recognized as King of Babylon and King of all the lands. The Cyrus cylinder text depicts the restoration of an existing order with Babylon at its center. However, once Babylonia was incorporated into an empire spanning an entire continent, many things were bound to change, including Babylonian royal inscriptions. 2 other brief inscriptions attributed to Cyrus have been discovered at sites in southern Babylonia, both stamped on bricks used in royal building projects. One from portrays him, like the cylinder text, as a benevolent foreign conqueror, using similar language. It identifies him as king of Anshan, proclaims that the gods granted him control over all lands, and asserts that he settled the land, Babylonia, in peace. The other, from Uruk, simply describes him as a mighty king who loves the temples. Isasol Temple of Marduk, and Azida, Temple of Nabu, attributes that could apply to any Babylonian ruler. No comparable documents from Cyrus's Persian successors have been found in Babylonia. As far as we know, they did not sponsor or commemorate the reconstruction of temples and palaces in traditional Babylonian forms. From the reign of Darius I onwards, the inscriptions of the Achaemenid kings at the palaces of Persepolis and Susa, on the cliff face at Bisutan in western Iran, and elsewhere consistently concluded versions in the Babylonian language, alongside versions in Elamite and Old Persian. A few fragments of such trilingual inscriptions have been found in the palace complex at Babylon. In form and content, these later Achaemenid inscriptions differed significantly from older Mesopotamian royal inscriptions and the Cyrus cylinder text. Their objectives did not include assuring Mesopotamian continuity. However, in the most extensive and elaborate of these inscriptions, the grand inscription of Darius I at Bisutan, the Babylonian version occasionally deviates from the Old Persian and Elamite versions to address a specifically Babylonian audience. In fact, in a fragmentary Babylonian edition of this text, found on a damaged stone monument in Babylon, the god who chooses, guides, and supports King Darius, identified as Ahura Mazda in the main edition, is instead referred to as Bel, allowing a Babylonian reader or listener to assume that Marduk is intended. This suggests that the Marduk who guided Cyrus also guided Darius, indicating that the tradition to which the Cyrus cylinder belonged was not entirely forgotten. After the Seleucid successors of Alexander the Great established control over Babylonia, Antiochus VII, who ruled from 281 to 261 BCE, left an inscription on a similarly barrel-shaped clay cylinder. This inscription, arranged like older Babylonian examples in two parallel columns and written in archaic sign forms, commemorates the reconstruction of the Azida, the Temple of Nabu at Borsippa near Babylon. Similar to the Cyrus cylinder, the prayers for blessings in the Antiochus cylinder associate the king with his son and successor, but unlike the Cyrus cylinder, also include his wife. The Antiochus cylinder is the last known document of this kind. The breathtaking mountain range site of Pasargadae, located 1,900 meters above sea level and approximately 50 kilometers northeast of Persepolis, is intrinsically linked to its renowned founder, Cyrus the Great. While only a limited number of inscriptions from Mesopotamia can be definitively attributed to Cyrus, the ruins of this majestic site offer valuable insights into the preferences and standards of this remarkable monarch. Pasargadae's significance is further enhanced by the fact that its initial excavator was the brilliant archaeologist Ernst Herzfeld. When Herzfeld embarked on his first explorations at Pasargadae in the early 20th century, the site's true identity remained uncertain. This was also a period when the study of Achaemenid art and architecture was still in its infancy. However, Herzfeld immediately recognized the exceptional importance of Pasargadae. Despite his wide-ranging archaeological interests, spanning from prehistoric times to the Islamic era, the challenges and questions surrounding the interpretation of Pasargadae's monuments captivated him for the rest of his life. Two cuneiform inscriptions were still visible at Pasargadae when Herzfeld first visited in 1905. Both were examples of the same trilingual Sema inscription, written in Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian. Herzfeld quickly deciphered the intended meaning of the text. I, Cyrus the king, an Achaemenid, built this monument. This realization allowed him to confidently declare that the enigmatic ruins situated near the so-called Garbri Madar Solomon, or Tomb of the Mother of Solomon, in the modern Dashti Morab, or Plain of the Waterbird, were the remnants of Cyrus the Great's long-lost capital. Furthermore, during his initial visit, Herzfeld accurately identified the lone surviving relief on the monumental gate structure as a winged genius, drawing upon the ancient tradition of apotropaic doorway figures found in Mesopotamia, particularly during the Neo-Assyrian period. In other words, he correctly recognized that the winged figure, with its divine headdress and supernatural wings, did not represent a portrait of Cyrus. Considering the remarkable achievements of Herzfeld's sole 4-week excavation season in 1928, it's astonishing that the entire expedition team consisted of only Herzfeld himself and Friedrich Krefter, a 25-year-old architect. Unsurprisingly, Herzfeld's documentation of his excavations was brief by modern standards. Nevertheless, he swiftly grasped the key characteristics of this expansive site. He recognized that most of the major structures shared a common orientation, a groundbreaking departure from previous architectural conventions in ancient Iran. The next excavations at Pasargadae were led by Ali Sami on behalf of the Iranian Archaeological Service. This pioneering Iranian archaeologist who worked at Pasargadae from 1949 to 1955 made significant contributions to the understanding of the site. He cleared the area surrounding Cyrus's tomb, uncovered and documented several early Islamic structures in its vicinity, unearthed the first traces of the site's main garden, and added crucial details to the still incomplete plans of Pasargade's 3 distinct palatial buildings. The most recent excavations at Pasargadae were conducted by David Stronach, representing the British Institute of Persian Studies from 1961 to 1963. This work led to the detailed publication of most of Pasargade's principal monuments and the discovery of additional elements of the main garden's layout, including its intricately carved stone water channels and basins. The prolonged delay in identifying Pasargade's location can likely be attributed to 2 primary factors. First, its true identity became obscured by the names of mythical historical figures, seemingly ascribed to certain monuments in the early medieval period, long after the site's original associations had faded from memory.
Second, instead of being situated within the core region of modern Fars near Persepolis, the site was discovered in one of the more elevated northern plains of Fars, although it did lie along the ancient highway connecting Fars to central and northern Iran. A plausible explanation for this unexpected location can be found in the writings of Strabo, the 1st century BCE Greek geographer and historian. Strabo's account informs us that Cyrus held Pasargadae in honor, because he there conquered Assages the Mede in his last battle, transferred to himself the empire of Asia, founded a city, and constructed a palace as a memorial to his victory. If this account is accurate, Cyrus chose to build his tomb and the other major monuments of his capital on the site of his pivotal 550 BCE victory over the last Median king, Astyages. This crucial event secured Persian independence and set the stage for Cyrus's subsequent far-reaching conquests. Fortunately, Cyrus's next major campaign was against Croesus, the king of Lydia, who, like Astyages, appears to have initiated hostilities. Cyrus emerged victorious, largely due to his ability to defy expectations.
Croesus's supposedly impregnable Acropolis at Sardis fell to Cyrus's forces in November 547 after a mere 14-day siege. From that point forward, the numerous highly skilled Ionian and Lydian stonemasons employed by Croesus were at Cyrus's command. This fortunate turn of events provided Cyrus with the resources to erect a lasting monument to his reign, characterized by cutting-edge planning and stone architecture. He recognized this as an opportunity not to be missed. Based on current evidence, it appears that Cyrus's major buildings were not only situated according to a comprehensive master plan, but were also likely constructed within a relatively short time frame, possibly within a few years of each other. The structure that most convincingly supports the theory of a 15-year construction program, spanning from approximately 546 BCE to Cyrus's death in 530 BCE, is the grand stone terrace that extends from the west side of Talitak, near the northern edge of the site. The construction of this imposing feature, likely intended to support the western end of a planned but never realized residential palace, was a massive and time-consuming endeavor that remained unfinished at the time of Cyrus's death. The roughly protruding central bosses visible on many of the unfinished ashlar blocks led Roman Gershman to believe that the entire platform predated Cyrus's more refined constructions in the adjacent plain, prompting him to attribute the monument to Cambyses' face, Cyrus's father. However, Carl Nylander convincingly demonstrated that the intended finish was exceptionally sophisticated. It involved finely drafted margins and delicate point stippling on the slightly raised central panels of each stone block, a style of surface treatment primarily found in Western Asia Minor, particularly during the mid-6th century BCE. Nylander's insightful observation aligns with the testimony of Darius the Great, Cyrus's successor, who states in his renowned foundation inscription from Susa that the stonecutters who wrought the stone, those were Ionians and Sardians. The placement of Cyrus's tomb is masterful. It stands apart from the other major monuments, commanding attention in the southern half of the Morkab plain. Its massive stonework and smooth surfaces, minimally adorned with decorative details, convey an enduring sense of dignity, simplicity, and strength. Its design integrates 2 distinct elements: a lofty plinth composed of 6 receding tiers and a modest gabled tomb chamber. The tomb stands out as another structure that reflects the involvement of skilled architects and stonemasons from Lydia and Ionia. It's essential to recognize that regardless of the architectural styles influencing its construction, this iconic monument undoubtedly met the specific requirements set forth by Cyrus himself. Above all else, it had to conform to the standards, preferences, and beliefs of Pasargade's founder. In March 1969, the remnants of a protruding rosette, seemingly overlooked in previous observations, were discovered on the apex of the triangular gable above the tomb's low entrance. The precise significance of this now incomplete rosette remains a mystery. Whether it held religious connotations or served as a skeuomorphic echo of a decorative wooden ridgepole end is unknown. The only certainty is that no identical rosette has been found in any other context. Previously designated as Gate R, or the palace with the relief, the Gate of Cyrus holds a prominent place in the history of Iranian architecture. As a freestanding formal gate, it served as a prototype for the Gate of Darius at Susa and the Gate of Xerxes at Persepolis. Its freestanding nature is particularly remarkable, as every city gate in the ancient Near East up to Cyrus's time was invariably incorporated into a towering perimeter wall. In this case, Cyrus seems to be making a statement. His resplendent capital city had no need for such defensive fortifications, which had always characterized earlier prominent capitals like Nineveh and Babylon. While the freestanding gates at Susa and Persepolis each featured 4 columns within a square-columned hall, reflecting Darius's preference for square-shaped rooms, the Gate of Cyrus housed a rectangular hall with 2 rows of 4 tall stone columns. This layout was already a familiar design for reception halls in the established mud brick and wood architecture of neighboring Media, suggesting that similar plans were either already present in Fars or were adopted from the Median region following Cyrus's annexation of that northern kingdom. In borrowing and adapting various elements of advanced building techniques and protective imagery, Cyrus, as we've seen, turned to the recently orphaned but still potent protective symbolism of Assyria. When seeking suitable apotropaic images to safeguard the 2 main and 2 side entrances of his 16-meter-high gate, he opted for 2 pairs of colossal winged figures to guard the opposing main doorways, a solution later replicated in Xerxes' Gate of All Lands at Persepolis. 2 pairs of protective anthropomorphic figures undoubtedly occupied the stone jambs of the side doorways as well. As evidenced by the single surviving example, these figures faced inwards rather than outwards, presumably to prevent malevolent forces from entering the site through the gate's central axis. Today, we understand that upon exiting the gate and proceeding towards the next significant destination, the audience hall, visitors would have encountered a man-made trapezoidal lake. After crossing a bridge at the narrow southern end of this distinctive body of water, visitors seeking an audience with the king would have been led to an appropriate location within the tall, 8-columned audience hall, known to archaeologists as Palace S. This structure was one of 2 impressive and innovative palaces introduced by Cyrus at Pasargadae. It can be considered one of the most important precursors to the grand audience halls of Darius's reign, the uniformly tall, square-shaped apodanas described in Old Persian inscriptions.